I'm delighted to be here today to celebrate Marie Stewart Edwards. Edwards was described by other suffragists as untiring, enthusiastic, and buoyant. Marie Edwards was state president of the Women's Franchise League in 1917 and 1918. And at first she didn't want the job. There were two major reasons for this. First of all, she admired the president at the time, Dr. Amelia Keller, and she was afraid that Keller wanted to continue the position and she didn't want to take it from her. The other reason she was reluctant is that she wanted to stay in Peru. And she wasn't sure that the women of the state would be happy that the Franchise League was run out of Peru. It took many, many suffragists to convince her to take the role, and probably the one that was most influential was Grace Julian Clark, who was the most well-known suffragist across the state. They were all convinced that Marie Edwards was the right person at the right place at the right time to take the job, and so she did take it. Edwards immediately put her skills to work consolidating what Dr. Keller had done. Dr. Keller had done a fantastic job over 6 or 7 years as president, growing the Women's Franchise League to 235 chapters across the state. Within a year, Marie Edwards had added 50 chapters to that, and she had come up with a system to make sure that everyone worked together. And I was so happy earlier someone talked about how everyone worked together for this day. She would really approve this. She came up with what she called a political system that started with a block chairwoman, and then a precinct chairwoman, and then a ward chairwoman, and you reported up the chain until you got to the district chairwoman. And this is how Edwards explained her plan. She said, no league can work by itself and get anywhere. What each league does or does not do affects vitally the other leagues in the state and the state campaign. So we must each feel a part of the whole, closely related and interdependent. And that is a hallmark of Marie Edwards' work. Coordination, cooperation. Everyone working together, being on the same page for this great goal. Edwards assumed the presidency at one of the most crucial times in Indiana suffrage history. In 1917, the state legislature passed 3 different bills that would give women the vote, and 2 of those bills would take effect that November 1917. One was a partial suffrage bill so that women could vote for certain offices, not everything. And the other was a bill to let women elect delegates to a state constitutional convention. And that sounds great, but those 2 bills I just mentioned were immediately challenged in the courts. There were some men who did not want women to vote. So Edwards reached out to her brother, Allison Stewart in Lafayette, a lawyer, and said, what do you think? Can you help us? And he was candid with her. He said, I think the partial suffrage bill is unconstitutional. But I think we should go ahead and try it anyway. And so he helped lead the effort as these lawsuits worked their way through the court system. So thank you to her brother for that as well. But think about that. She's only been president maybe 2 months. And all of a sudden she has to lead these challenges against these suffrage bills. She attended the hearings. She made sure that every negative decision was appealed. And in the end, when no more appeals were possible and women did not get to vote that November, she wrote a letter to the Women's Franchise League members, and the salutation read, "Dear near voters." That must have been very hard for her to write. The next year, the Women's Franchise League was at it again, and in the summer of 1918, in the midst of all the dust and the heat, they started a major membership drive. And Miami County, by the way, well known for what they called flying squadrons of women jumping in cars and going out and registering women to join the Franchise League. This is what Edwards said to rally her troops that summer. Overnight, we became of interest to both political parties. I believe we all thoroughly enjoyed our sudden popularity and were amused at the way we were courted. That taste of power has been fatal. Many women before not interested in suffrage now demand to know why they cannot vote. The withdrawal of the voting privilege has enormously increased the interest in women for suffrage. To the general public, we can never again be the negligible quantity we were before. The fact remains that for a while, we were voters, and all the effect of that is not lost. What a rallying cry, and you can tell from her writing, she really deeply felt that this was a turning point. And she also encouraged League members at that point to push for the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, the federal amendment. Due in large part to this plan and this sense of urgency, in 1918, tens of thousands of women across the state joined the Women's Franchise League and signed petitions in favor of the federal amendment. Remember that Marie Edwards did this while she was also helping to work with her family's chair factory. She was caring for her son. We're in the midst of a flu pandemic, and the Women's Franchise League had adopted war work as one of their missions as well. Knitting socks for soldiers who were in World War I, working in factories, driving state officials and military officials around the state. They said, well, we want the vote, but we have to do both. I can't imagine the exhaustion. Untiring is an understatement, I think. Well, as we know, we did get the vote in Indiana. When Indiana legislators finally met to ratify the 19th Amendment on January 16, 1920, with only 3 votes against. Edwards, even though she was no longer the Franchise League president at that point, sat with the Speaker in the House and with the Lieutenant Governor in the Senate as both houses passed the 19th Amendment. She and several other suffragists were invited by Governor Goodrich to watch him sign the ratification of the 19th Amendment, and she was given one of the people given a pen to commemorate that. Marie Edwards was also well known at the national level. She stepped down from the Women's Franchise League to work with the National American Woman Suffrage Association as it pushed the Susan B. Anthony through that final work. The National American Woman Suffrage Association then transformed itself into that very important organization that we still have today, the League of Women Voters. That's where that comes from. And even though she was not well known at the national level, they had enough confidence in her ability that she was named the first treasurer of the national office of the League of Women Voters, and also one of the vice presidents. So she came in, she did amazing work, and was recognized at the national level for it. My final comment for today, Marie Edwards was typical of all Hoosier suffragists in one important way. She knew that the vote was the key to solving problems, from guaranteeing pure food and milk, to eradicating child labor in the state, to improving working conditions for everyone, to creating our state parks, to dealing with the sale of alcoholic beverages, to preventing another world war, and dealing with a host of other issues. For most suffragists, the vote was a means to many ends, and they, and Marie Edwards, were fearless in their pursuit of it. Thank you.